Hey everybody, this is Clint Rolls with Delta Valves and CVS Controls. Today we got a customer that is trying to change out the bellows in a pneumatic pressure controller, and changing the bellows can change the output of the controller from 3 to 15 to 6 to 30 or vice versa. It's just a hopefully short video on how to do it. Here we have a CVS 4150 controller. Some of the tools you might need are a large and small flathead screwdriver. Preferably if you've got one of the screw holder type screwdrivers, that will make your life a lot easier. A 1/4 inch, 5/16, and 3/8 inch wrenches, and a little bit of super glue. Very, very small amount. Now, if you're doing this in the field, the first thing you want to remember is that this has line pressure going to it. And we are going to have to take the line pressurized components loose and out. So you're going to have to block your sensing line and bleed whatever pressure you might have in that sensing line or in this loop out before you get started. Then you're going to want to block in your pneumatic supply going to the back of the controller. Anyhow, to get started, the first thing we want to remove is this board-on tube assembly. I normally, just for taking that out, only remove the tubing up top. I'll leave the loop attached. I'm going to take these two screws out. That drops the bellows seal assembly down. However, we've got this link attachment that we have to kind of hold on to, break loose. That's a little bitty screw there in the back. And sometimes in the field it could fall and be lost. I'm not sure if you can see this or not. There's a little like spacer sleeve on there. That spacer sleeve is very, very important. Do not lose it. Alright, so now we got that loose, we can go ahead and move it out of the way and set it down. Your next step, of course, is going to be the tubing coming from the relay down to the nozzle, and then from the proportional band to the bellows assembly. That is going to be the 5/16 wrench. It's also good to note here, there's two ports on the back side of this bellows assembly. There's a front port and a back port, and there's different configurations for direct acting and reverse acting, so definitely take note of what the action of the controller is, or at least, I shouldn't say that, who cares what the action of the controller is if you're not changing that. Make sure you know where you took it out of and you put it back in the same spot. If you have big giant hands, this may not be an easy job for you. That piece of tubing on the back side is very, very difficult to reach back and get to. Now the loop is put in this tubing to help give it some spring action so you can physically lift up and pry this out from the bottom, just to make life easier. Now, there's 6 screws in the back of this controller. You can see that one there. There's another one, oops, another one down here, and 4 more over here. They're all kind of located equal places. We're going to go ahead and pull these. Got this assembly loose. Try not to scratch the disc. Pump those out. Don't lose any of those. Set those to the side. Alright, so here's the back plate assembly. So these are the 2 bellows you're trying to change out. These green ones are 3 to 15 bellows, and yellow is 6 to 30. Now this is going to be the output to the actual control valve or positioner. So it's very important when you're ordering these, you know what the input to your positioner's control signal is, or the actuator spring range. If it's 3 to 15, it's these green guys. If it's 6 to 30, it's going to be the yellow. Alright, anyhow, to remove these, there's a screw here and a screw here. So exactly, holding each bellows assembly in. So all I'm going to do is break these loose by about 2 turns. Once I've got those loose by the 2 turns, the screw's sticking out just a tiny bit, but it's threaded into the bellows. The bellows physically will just practically weld itself via gasket and pressure to both ends. So I take my screwdriver, I just give it a tap till it comes loose. You can actually hear it. It'll be solid the first tap. Second tap, if it's hard enough, you'll hear it boom, and you can feel it as well. So now that that's loose, we can unscrew both screws on either end. And these screws are physically ported. They have a tiny little hole in them. So it's not that you can confuse it with anything else here, but if you lose one, you can't just stick a normal screw in it. Okay, now we've got both of the screws out, so these are physically loose now that we broke everything loose. And we want to push this flapper assembly that direction away from the nozzle. I guess if this is a direct acting, the nozzle will be down here. You just want to push it away from the nozzle so it doesn't hit, and then physically turn it up and out and away from the nozzle. That way you don't damage the nozzle. And let's see the best way for you to see this. So basically all I'm going to do is just kind of compress these a little and wiggle them out. Boom. So on this assembly, both my gaskets stayed on. Normally the gaskets will pop off. Holding these to this assembly is just a threaded piece of all thread. So you physically break it loose, hold one side, and boop, drop it off. There you go. So now, and this all thread just floats, so it's just floating through. Anyhow, typically you'll have to take these gaskets off. They're reusable, there's nothing wrong with them, they're just rubber gaskets. They're only sealing, well, at the most 35 pounds of air. And when you go to put these on, it's such a tight fit when you reinstall it back into the assembly that it constantly pushes the gasket off. And if you don't have that hole lined up for that screw to go in, it makes it very difficult. So, hence the super glue. And you got to be very gentle with this. And when I put it on, typically I'll put a tiny little dab here and a tiny little dab there, and then when I set the gasket on, I will spin it and then make sure the hole's lined up. Spinning it just kind of thins it out, spreads it. It's just enough to hold it on. That's it. And then now we're going to reverse the disassembly process and reassemble it. Take note as to how far in, on each side the threaded piece of all thread is. Typically what I like to do is kind of hold it halfway with my finger on one side, and I'll screw this until it touches, like right there, and then I will screw the other side, holding downward tension to kind of keep this stud from turning. And then once it gets close, give it a little bit, not much. These bellows aren't made of much. Alright, so now make sure you're reinstalling it, facing the right way. And currently my entire assembly is upside down, so it's kind of foreign. But for me, it's going to be just like this. Now these act just like springs, so you physically have to push them or compress this unit to get it back together. And also ensure that this doesn't go in and bash up against your nozzle. Okay. It's best if you look through the top and you can kind of see down in there and make sure that your bellows is lining up with the screw hole. So now I just want to get these screwed in a good ways. But not locked down, because we still got to turn the flapper assembly back in. Alright, so now I'm going to just do the reverse procedure and push this down. I'm going to turn it till the flapper assembly, I don't know if I can configure this to see it, but till the flapper assembly lines up in the center, or that beam is parallel. Once I've achieved that, now I can tighten my top bellows. You'll see this might try and turn on you a little bit, and that's okay. Just be gentle and work with it from the top to the bottom, because when you turn the top, it's going to turn it one way, and when you turn the bottom, it's going to kind of turn it the other. So first one you tighten is going to throw it out of alignment. Second one you tighten until it aligns. And like me talking, doing a video, mine is out of alignment. There we go. Yeah, right there. Okay, now it's just reversing the procedure. We're going to go ahead and put it back in its case. Whew, I thought I could do this in a short video. We're running on 15 minutes now. I'm not going to tighten any of these down because they're slopping the assembly of the entire component, so leave them all loose to make sure you get them all threaded in first. And you'll find if you tighten one of them up, it won't, one of the other screws won't line up. So just leave them all with a little slack. See, the holder screwdriver would work really well right now. However, I have one in my service truck, but my service truck is not here, so gotta make do. Well, for the video's sake and the length of the video, you can skip through this part because you already know what to do. I'm just going to keep rolling. Alright, now we're going to go ahead and put our tubing back in. I'm going to start with this assembly and just feeding it back around. Now don't forget that this tubing, these fitting ends are stainless. And you're screwing into an aluminum component, so in doing that, you can cross thread these and destroy the threads. It's very, very easy. As soon as I get it started and I make sure it's not cross threaded, I go start the other side.
And then I try and screw them. They should really screw almost completely in by hand. Sure they're not cross-threaded. If you got a wrench, it'd be a good to get it going. Alright, so let's stick the top side first. I'm going to spring the bottom in.
Beautiful. Alright, now hopefully you paid attention to the amount of tension that was on these when you took them loose, and that's the same amount of tension you want to put back on them. It's not much. I suggest using a standard length wrench, nothing extended handle, or if you do use an extended handle, use common sense and don't crank these. They only need to be tight enough to seal, nothing more. Alright, I'm not going to tighten them because we need to get on with the video. So now, we're going to reinstall our bellows assembly. It's these two screws here. Well, if I can get it to line up. There we go. When I install this, this has play. I typically just like to line it up kind of square with the side whenever I tighten it. Just, I don't know, creature of habit. Now we thread our tubing back on, tighten our tubing back up. There. And now we've got this little tiny screw with a little bitty spacer slash bearing. So for me, I'm just going to try and hold it like this, but I highly suggest a holder screwdriver. So I can get it in there. Hey, look. That was alright. Now on this, we just want to give it a little bit of tension, lock it down, and that's it. Now that video is just show how to replace the bellows. Like I say, the biggest thing is to make sure your sensing line is disconnected or shut off and bled out. And along with that, I mean, you've got low pressure regulated air going in the back. You know, make sure it's shut off. It'd be handy right now to have a bottle of Snoop or soap and water and turn your pneumatic air supply back on and go ahead and snoop all the fittings you took loose, and make sure that it's all sealed up. And when doing that, I like to take the pressure setting dial and physically make this thing operate one way and the other. That ensures pressure is going through the tubing in every which, direction. Once all that's good, I mean, if you got to tighten up a fitting or two, that's fine. I've had to do it plenty of times. Once all that's good, you're good to go. All right. Good luck, and let me know if you have any questions.